Welcome to Dead Man Talking. Tonight's show is a spine-tingling tale that I'm sure you can all sink your teeth into. As ever, please do let us know down below in the comments what you thought. Please do like and share. It really does help build the channel and our amazing community further. And of course, don't forget to hashtag TeamFEAR. And what an amazing start to the year, as we just passed 26,000 subscribers at the DMT family at about 2 AM this morning. Thank you all so much for your amazing support, the kind comments, the shares, the likes. It really does help and keep a buzz and keep growing further and further. So thank you all so much. And so, with that aside, let's get into tonight's story, entitled "We've been hunted by a monster for weeks." Let's get straight into that. Disclaimer: I have omitted all the references to where I live because no one's ever supposed to know about this. The government has been quite clear about what happens if we share our story. I hope there's a way they can trace my identity through Reddit. I've been living in my basement for the past 5 weeks. My dad lives with me too. I went, I guess, to a local community college, staying at home to save rent. My mum disappeared about the same time. We both were trapped inside our house. I guess I should make a correction. I don't technically live in my basement. My dad and I go upstairs every once in a while to restock on the food from our big walk-in pantry. For the most part though, we have everything we need down here. A twin-size bed for me, a sleeping bag for my dad. He insisted I take the bed. A fully stocked fridge and freezer, piles of canned goods, a lifetime supply of batteries, and a generator. Basically, everything you need for the apocalypse, which has more or less happened. You see, when I came home one night from class, I don't remember when it was exactly, I heard this weird noise outside. Where we live, coyotes aren't too uncommon, so I figured that it must be that. After all, it did sound like one. The noise was part whine, part growl. I almost forgot about it, and to be honest, those kinds of things don't faze me anymore. Also, I was playing video games, and I didn't want to be interrupted. It only caught my attention when it started to growl. I refer to this thing as it because I still have no idea what it is. I don't think anyone does, and at that point, I went over to my window to look, and there was nothing in sight. I figured it was on a different side of the house, and so I went through a couple of different rooms and looked out the windows. Nothing. It was getting dark, and so I knew I might have missed it. I could still hear the noise intermittently, and when I was going through the rooms a second time, my mum stopped me. "What's wrong?" she asked. "Lose something?" "No. Do you hear that growling? It's really getting on my nerves. I can't focus." She rolled her eyes. I tried to explain in the past how most video games actually required focus. Like most mums, she didn't understand how that could be possible. She probably thought it was like watching a TV show or something. My mum and I stood still, and after a few seconds, the growls resumed. "Yeah, I do hear that," she said. "Probably just a coyote." "Mum, coyotes don't sound like that," I said. It gurgled in response, a noise I hadn't heard before and never hope to hear again. Imagine someone gurgling mouthwash, except they are also choking at the same time. That's as close as I can describe the sound. She frowned, more annoyed than worried. "We should call the police, I guess." At the time it seemed like a good idea, and to be honest, I don't think there was much else to do. At some point, one of us would have to go outside. My dad worked from home, but my mum went shopping most days, and I, of course, had classes. It didn't matter now. She called, and they showed up pretty fast. Most of the time it took half an hour or longer for them to respond to non-emergencies. And part of that was probably because of our town is so small, and the PD is predictably understaffed. Well, I guess they weren't for the most part, but there were times that they could have used more people. Like that night. They arrived 10 minutes after the call. One of them knocked on the door, and my mum went to answer. I had gone back to my room, and so I only heard pieces of the conversation. My focus had returned to the video games. The door closed, and I guessed that my mum had gone outside for some reason. I dropped my controller when I heard screaming outside. I'd been playing COD, and my character got lit up on screen. My focus, however, had shifted entirely to the noises outside. What sounded like a roar echoed down the street, followed by more screams and a gunshot. I never understood how people could freeze up in emergencies. There had been a man in the past year that had watched, slack-jacked, as someone else had got mauled by a bear. No one blamed him for his inaction, of course, and I didn't either. You can't exactly fight a bear without a gun. I just couldn't imagine being in that kind of shock. I understand now. As I listened to the last couple of screams, I finally found the ability to move. Part of me was denying what I'd heard, that there was no way my mum could be dead. I was thinking worst case scenario, and I knew it. First of all, I didn't even know what had happened. It was possible that no one was hurt, that whatever animal had been outside had been killed. I knew that was wishful thinking, though. Something had gone wrong. I'm still not sure what happened. All I know is that I went downstairs to look out of our living room window, and there was a trail of blood in the driveway, and a couple of scraps of what had been probably an officer's uniform. That was it. No bodies, no stray gun, no other signs of violence. It should have been impossible. At that point, my dad said something behind me. I was still pretty shocked, so I didn't hear what he said. When he shook me by the shoulder, I was able to listen. "What happened?" he asked. His face was pale, and he was panting like he'd just run a marathon. To my horror, I'd been doing the same thing. I probably scared him more than the screaming had. "I have no idea," I stammered. I pointed out the window of the trail of blood. My dad took one look and ran into the kitchen. "I'm calling the police," he said. "Mum just did that," I pointed out. Then I remembered that my dad had been working in the office, probably with his headphones on. He used to own a local shop before all of this shit happened, and he worked from home more times than not. I realised that he wouldn't have heard any conversation, though he clearly had heard the screams. He almost dropped his phone. "Your mother was out there?" he said calmly. "Yeah." I didn't elaborate. There was no need. I sat down heavily onto one of the couches. My dad went ahead and placed the call. They said they would send another unit out immediately, but we never heard back. We didn't hear anything that evening. No matter how many times we called or frantically searched Google, my dad gave up after calling to check in for the third time. We spent the rest of the evening in silence. Neither of us remembered to eat. I never had much of an appetite anyways. We didn't speak much about what had happened. I brought up the fact that my mum could be hurt or dead, though I didn't say that explicitly, and he silenced me. He knew that it wasn't good to talk about, not until we knew more details. I didn't get much sleep that night. Video games could not distract me from the thing that had taken my mum. I gave up after a few minutes. Not even Reddit could distract me, and so I just laid on my bed and stared at the ceiling until, mercifully, I fell asleep. My dad woke me up the next morning. "You have to come see this," he said. The grim look on his face, combined with the prior day's events, were enough to jolt me awake. The local news was on. A blurred photo of something was shown on screen, with a giant question mark above it. I couldn't make out details except for fur and what looked like 4 limbs. The photo had clearly been taken while a person was running. The background was blurred, too. "Last night, there was an attack at redacted," the reporter was saying. "People claim they heard a strange growling noise before an unnamed woman called the police. And that's where the story ends. No one heard back from the police or the neighbours. The second squadron was sent in to investigate, but they found no clues of what happened. We are still waiting for further information." "Damn it! I called them," Dad said. "They just didn't pick up." I was willing to chalk up their incompetence to the PD. As I said earlier, we live in a small town. And to be fair, I had no idea that they were lying. The day crawled along. I tried getting some work done. I had a couple of days off from school, but I couldn't focus. Every other minute took me back to the bloody driveway and the mystery of what had happened. I wanted to think that my mum was okay. My dad felt the same, although he locked himself in his office for 10 hours. My first thought was that he wanted to avoid talking to me because he didn't know what to say. Much later, I realised that he was giving me much-needed space. I had to digest the uncertainty and fear on my own, before I'd even come close to talking with him. Much of that day was spent staring at the wall. I'm usually productive, but I guess no one would be in my circumstances. It didn't matter, anyways. School dropped off my radar pretty fast. More news trickled in that evening. My dad and I were eating a mostly silent dinner of soup. We'd spoken a little, but there was not much to be said. We were both in a sort of denial, convinced that my mum would come back at some point, or at least that we'd find her. It may have been for the best that if it was left unknown, knowing what that monster has done since. The same news guy was on, though he looked more frazzled than he had earlier. His hair was a mess and there were pronounced rings under his eyes. We've had reports of 10 different police officers that have gone missing, he said. There was more, but the first sentence was all I remembered. I hadn't even known there was 10 people in the entire PD, and that many had gone missing. We were in deep shit. Worse, there were video clips, obviously taken from people's smartphones, of people in black suits surrounding the area. The governor made this statement later, saying that there was federal intervention going on in our town, and that everyone was advised to keep their distance. Pretty cheesy, I know, except it wasn't funny then. It still isn't, really. No one knew what was going on, and the feds could have been the men in black or something. I can't rule anything out. It didn't take them long to lock the place down. No one was to enter or leave the neighbourhood. Other residents were advised to temporarily leave the town because there was a shit ton of government traffic in that area. And 2 nights after the feds arrived, my dad questioned their motives. "You think they're really government?" he asked over breakfast. "I think it's a load of shit. They just don't want to admit their mistakes. It's a cover-up, probably." My dad didn't usually buy into conspiracy theories, and that gives you an idea of how serious this whole thing had become. Worse, I even believed him. Surely the government order, which was later enforced by martial law, couldn't be real. What were they to do if someone tried to leave? Arrest them? I wish that had been the case. We learned the next morning that a family had tried to escape. The feds, if that's who they really were, tried to stop them, but they went on ahead, and then they disappeared. No one saw them again. Other family members were baffled. Friends couldn't get in touch with them. Even their car had mysteriously vanished, despite being sighted just 5 minutes from a gas station. I knew what had happened, though. The monster had found them, just as it had found my mum, and as it would find many others. Right now, it's been 5.5 weeks since that monster arrived. I started this entry a couple of days ago, but I didn't have the guts to post it. I still haven't. I guess because of all the possible repercussions. The government wants to keep a lid on this thing as much as possible. No one cares about small towns. Even if a dozen people go missing, the general public will buy into anything the news outlets say. And, at this point, I think those outlets are told what to say. The news stopped covering the incident almost as soon as the feds arrived. No one's questioned it since. And it's not just the media. Anyone who shares online about it has their post deleted. Most of the time, people tweet out updates or try posting videos of the monster. It gets taken down in seconds. I tried myself, and since I got the picture of the thing the other day, my image was no clearer than anyone else's that had showed a big, furry, 4-legged thing, and it was deleted almost instantly. When I tried again, I found myself locked out of my account. I have no idea how deep this cover-up runs. And my dad was right, I'm sure of it. Whatever's happening here, the government doesn't want the people to know about it. We're still in contact with family and friends, at least the ones who are out of state. They have no more luck than we do. They, of course, believe our story, seeing as they can't get flights to any airport nearby and that we can't physically leave. Anyone else views our story with skepticism, treating it as another internet conspiracy. To be fair, I would too. Probably no one's heard of our town or any towns nearby, and our family has no evidence to support what's happening. Everyone in our town, at least the ones we've tried to contact, has left or gone missing. My dad even checked our street one day, bringing his shotgun with him after we'd gone a couple of days without hearing the monster. Everything was abandoned. There weren't even feds anymore, or policemen, or anyone of authority. We would have driven out then, had there not been a problem with our car. My dad's still trying to fix the engine. As I write this, I'm not sure what will happen next. My dad insists that we leave soon, but I'm hesitant. After all, that family that tried leaving a month ago vanished, and they had driven as far as 30 miles from our house. Nowhere nearby was safe. A car wasn't adequate protection either, and still, we can't stay here forever. We only have so much food, though the neighbours also left some, and, more importantly, I don't think we can stay sane spending a year in isolation. The growling today was worse than usual. It's not uncommon for the monster to stop by. For some reason, it does so semi-daily, yet it never gets close to our house. The monster is only ever visible from a distance, and even then, its presence is uncertain. Without the growling, we'd have probably tried leaving by now, and so I guess the noise is a good thing. It usually stays for a few minutes, then leaves for the day. Once it was gone for a week. My dad managed to fix our car today, said it was something with the piston. I have no idea how he fixed it, or what the hell the piston does. He spent the last couple of weeks researching it online and teaching himself. Not like we have much else to do. After we got over the shock of everything, I pretty much isolated myself, playing video games and browsing Reddit. My dad and I aren't that close. We did used to do things outside, biking, hiking, fishing, and that's not an option anymore. And so without that, there's not much to do except sit around. We were both in a good mood tonight, with the car being fixed, and so I decided to broach the subject. "Do you think we can leave now?" I asked. "I don't know." My dad hesitated. "I guess we should try." He didn't need to say no more. Spending a month in isolation leads to a lot of unspoken communication. I knew what he was thinking. We were perfectly safe for now. The creature had never entered anyone's home. It always preyed on those who went outside, and we still had enough food for half a year. Our generator had died, but we have solar panels outside that at least give us some electricity. All things considered, we were in a decent place. It's probably a good idea to wait. We still hear the monster most days, and another month of this should be bearable enough. The first weeks were the hardest. Anyways, I think I'm getting used to being alone. I feel like I should be trying to post this, but I don't want to get my other accounts deleted. I tried again yesterday to post some images on my Instagram account. Not only did they get deleted, but so did my profile. And when I tried to make another one, it gave me a strange error that I'd never seen before. Some kind of error code with a bunch of letters and numbers. I suspect it's not a coincidence. My other accounts work for some reason. There doesn't seem to be much logic to things that do work. For instance, we can talk with our cousins in Wisconsin as much as we want about the monster. As I said, they believe us completely, even if no one else does. Problem is, there's no way to change that without getting some photos out. It's not like anyone will come to visit our town, and if they did, they'd disappear before they could get the word out. And for the moment, we'll stay put. But I don't know how long that will last. The temptation of leaving, even with the monster as a threat, is too great. It would have been better if the car had been functional this whole time, and so we could have exercised some self-control. I suppose it won't make much of a difference in the end. It's time to post this damn story. I don't care anymore. I'm posting it everywhere. My Romanian Reddit account, 4chan, fanfic websites, anywhere that lets me post stories. It no longer matters if my post makes it out or not, and by the end of today, I'll either be dead or far away from this town. Maybe I'll be able to share its name when I do get out. It will be nice to talk to other people. The conversations I have over the phone don't really count. It's hard to convey just how taxing this isolation has been, now that we know we're leaving. The reason we're leaving is simple. The monster is gone. At least we think it is. An old friend of mine who happens to live in my state sent me some frantic texts earlier, saying that he knows we haven't talked in forever, but I just had to have seen something. No one else was responding to him, it seems. I should feel flattered that he remembered me at all. I had to think for a while before I even recognized his face. He sent pictures. Like me, he lives in a pretty small town, though it's a little bit bigger. About 10,000 people versus the couple of thousand in mine. There's not just one monster anymore, there are dozens of the things. And for some reason, all the photos turned out blurry, just like the ones I tried taking. I can't say I'm surprised. I still sometimes find myself doubting what's happened, convinced that I must be going insane. If it weren't for my dad, who has been as stoic as ever, I would have ventured out already and yelled for the thing to come and get me. The monster near us hasn't appeared in some time. It's been at least 3 days, maybe 4. I haven't exactly kept track. I think we realised this morning that something was up. Not hearing it had been more noticeable at this point. My dad thinks that it might have moved on, and that now is our best chance of escaping. I'm not sure I agree, given how many my old friends saw. But I can't deny one fact. We'll either leave or die of starvation. It's not a tough decision, even if we might head towards our deaths. I'm ready. I'm sick of waiting. I didn't realise it until our car got fixed, but I've been wasting my life in this house. Sure, we might die going outside, but what's the difference if we have to leave anyways? My dad won't wait for us to starve. I won't either. He risked going over to our neighbour's house this morning. To my surprise, he made it back unscathed. We now have 3 guns and a shit ton of ammunition. The neighbours even had old Lee Enfield sniper from World War II. It seems to work. My dad tested it out. I told him it was too risky, that the monster could be drawn to us by the noise, until he pointed out that we'll be driving for hours anyways. Plenty of time for the thing to catch us if it's going to. And we know that, if it wants to, it will. God knows how many it's already taken. Wish me luck. I really hope someone reads this, and if I don't make it, but this still gets out there, keep an eye on the news. The second you hear about a strange animal or see blurry photos of a black-end grey behemoth, get the fuck out of wherever you live. Maybe out of the country. It's possible the monster is averse to heat or cold. Probably cold. If we do make it out, we're heading to Canada. I'll post if we make it out safely, and if this post even survives. We've been hunted by a monster for weeks. The final. Let's get straight into that. Sorry for the delay. A lot has happened since my first post. My phone was dead too, so I couldn't share anything if I wanted to. But, to be honest, I kind of forgot about my first post with all that's been going on. Anyways, back to when we tried to escape. We left the house without issue. There are 2 roads that go out of my town. One winds south and the other north. And since we were headed to Canada, we took the north road, through long stretches of isolated forest. I was pretty nervous to say the least. No one had gotten out of the town alive. Worse, there was that friend that had texted me, showing that our monster was just one of many, and that they were beginning to spread. My dad had made up his mind though, and convinced me to do the same. We could have stayed. It would have been like waiting for a death sentence. Better to die trying to escape, which, if you haven't figured out by now, worked. We had our first run-in with the monster partway down the northbound road. The thing was fast, and we were driving along without issue, and then the car suddenly exploded in front of us as if we'd hit something, which we did. I was too dazed at first to notice, and so was my dad, but we noticed the bashed-in hood of the car after a few seconds. There was fur sticking out of one of the headlights, which had broken. Other than that, nothing suggested the monster. Somehow, we did not jump to that conclusion at first. My dad figured he'd just missed a deer on the road. It happens all the time, and the fur actually looked like deer fur, somehow. It was a dark tan about the length of a phone. Our car still worked, and so we kept driving. That was a mistake. About a minute after the accident, I heard the sound of tyres being slashed. Don't ask me how that happened while we were moving. I don't know. My dad claims he didn't even notice until the car began skidding to a stop. When we did stop, my dad cursed. He at first thought that the initial accident had screwed something up, until I told him what I'd heard. And that's when he balked. We both knew that the monster had probably been responsible. And sure enough, it emerged from the nearby trees, and it was fast. Like supernaturally fast. I swear that in less than a second, it covered 100 feet between us and the woods. And then it was at the car, scrabbling with its claws at my window in the back. It was the first time I'd gotten a good look at the thing. It had a hunched back, kind of like a werewolf, and claws the size of a hand. The fur was indeed the same shade as that of a deer. Worst was its black, beady eyes, like the eyes of any predator you see in movies. And somehow, it couldn't break through the window. The monster even tried gnawing its way in with its rows of shark-like teeth. I could only watch in horror as it slobbered onto the car. My dad snapped me out of it. "Get the gun!" he yelled at me. I, for some reason, asked him which one. "Any," he said. So I grabbed the first one I could from the trunk. Thankfully, it was a hatchback. I came back with the shotgun, which was a relief, and the sniper would have not been ideal in that situation. My dad had shown me how to fire the guns before we left, and with an exception of the sniper, he said that there was no way I could learn enough in a few minutes. And besides, if we were in a position to use it, he'd have time to grab it himself and line up the shot. I'd never gone hunting with him, never really had an interest in guns until now, but I paid attention to every detail he showed me. I had known our lives might depend on it, like they did right then. In hindsight, while we didn't have a choice, it was not the smartest thing to do. There could have been shrapnel, especially because my shot caught the upper part of the window, where it bordered the metal of the car. But we got lucky. The monster howled, and I could see it pouring red blood onto the ground. It ran back into the woods as fast as it had come. I sat there with the gun, waiting for the longest few minutes of my life. My dad finally told me to lower the gun, and there was no more monsters coming. I relented, turning the safety back on and putting the gun on the back seat. "Well, fuck," my dad said. "What?" "The car." It took me a moment, but I realized what he was saying. The car was now borderline totaled. In addition to the busted front end, the tires were now slashed. We only had one spare on the back, and we were ballsy enough to get out and check the damage. Both of the rear tires were busted, and I mean it. The rubber was shredded, and the metal was gouged at least half an inch deep. I was amazed that the monster hadn't broken into our car. "We'll have to walk," my dad said grimly. I did not like that idea at all. Yeah, we'd heard one of the monsters, and nothing was after us at the moment, but I had seen how fast that thing was. If it did decide to come after us out in the open, we would be dead. I doubted I could even pull a trigger faster than the monster ran at us. My dad convinced me to go. If we stayed in the car, he said, it would be the same as hiding in a house. We'd be waiting for the inevitable. Worse, we had only brought a few supplies, snacks, some PB&J sandwiches, water, the guns, and a first aid kit. But to be fair, that was all we should have needed. The drive up to Canada was not long, only a few hours at most. We couldn't bring the supplies with us either. Neither of us had thought to bring backpacks. Again, the trip wasn't supposed to take that long. We figured that any delays would end up with us dead. No points in overstocking the car. I suppose that was pretty stupid of us in hindsight. We each took a gun. I kept the shotgun, since I knew I could use it. My dad took a 9mm pistol he'd nabbed in what had most likely been an illegal auction. I didn't care now though. At that time, my mum had criticised him for it. There was plenty of ammo, and so we stuffed our pants and coat pockets. We did not bring any food or water. My dad knew there was a convenience store 4 miles away, and more supplies would have bogged us down. The guns and ammo were already enough to carry. It took the better part of 2 hours to walk there, and for the most of that walk, I expected to die. My hands shook so hard that I dropped the shotgun twice. And thank God I remembered to turn on the safety before. I would have blown one of us apart otherwise. I even fingered the trigger when I saw movement at one point. It had been a squirrel, and I didn't care about shooting the thing, but I did worry about attracting the monster with noise. I knew that my dad had been right, that there was no point hiding inside the car, but I wanted to run back there after a few minutes. And starving had more appeal than being torn apart by a monster. We made it without issue, and by the time we walked into that store, I was dead tired. My anxiety had worn off, and I'd already been running on fumes. The first thing I did was set my shotgun down and curl up in a waiting chair in the back. We stayed there for 3 days. Neither of us was eager to leave. There were lots of non-perishables in the store, and the doors could be double bolted, and there was even a microwave in the back. And plus, there was a cellar with an entrance from the inside, which went down about 30 feet into the ground. We were as safe there as we had been at our own home. Mostly, I think we were waiting. There was no more sightings of a monster, but with half a dozen windows and glass doors in place, we expected a monster to at least come sniffing. Nothing bothered us. There were no people either, which bothered me. And since that road was one of the two going out of town, it usually had a lot of traffic. We did not spot a single car in our time at the store. There weren't even any in the small parking lot, unless you can count the rusted Volkswagen Beetle frame sitting on the grass. That thing had been there since my dad was a kid. No one had bothered to tow it, and it kind of became a novelty over the time. We took our time figuring out what to do. My dad and I knew that whatever we decided next would determine whether we made it out alive. We were in no rush either, being in a store stocked with food, water, and heat. There was even a cellar we could have retreated to had a monster tried to break in, and we even found some sleeping bags down there. Our first idea came from me, and it was pretty much shot down immediately. I thought we should call someone for help, not the police, since they all went missing before, but a friend or someone else nearby. My dad pointed out that no one would want to come pick us up, with the monsters roaming around, and they probably couldn't. We suspected that the government was keeping everyone out. They hadn't kept us from leaving, true, but they probably couldn't. Staying in that town would have been a death sentence. Not to mention that our phones were dead, and neither of us had thought to bring chargers. If we'd spent a few hours on the road as planned, we wouldn't have needed them, and would have just bought some in Canada. And that decision was starting to look bad, along with the many other things we'd neglected. My dad thought for a while that we could wait for a car to drive down the road, and that we could signal it with our guns. Not a terrible idea, really. A lot better than mine. Just one problem. There were still no cars. Even after 2 days of waiting, no signs of life either. Which was good, because we didn't see the monster, but it was also strange. There were usually animals roaming the woods. We settled on a new plan when it became clear that cars weren't coming. I suppose we could have been more patient. It didn't make sense to wait though, not with the one monster around and possibility of more trying to break in. Our situation had become no different than before when we decided to leave home. We would either leave or stay put and die. My dad knew that the PD was 10 miles or so down the road. He had been very hesitant to consider walking, and for good reason. 10 miles would take hours to cover, plenty of time for a monster to ambush us, which would likely end in our deaths. I also suspected that, during our walk to the store, we had not gotten lucky at all. The monster I'd shot was probably the only one in the area. It would not have come after us so soon after being attacked, but 3 days had passed, and it might have shaken off its hesitation at that point. It wasn't much of a choice, really. We had nowhere else to go, and the store was like a ticking time bomb. My dad suggested at one point that maybe I'd killed the monster, and that was why it hadn't bothered us. I doubted that seriously. I also knew that there were more monsters, a lot more, in the nearby town. The one my friend had texted me from, and if they decided to come near us, we were probably screwed. And so, early that afternoon, we decided to leave. There were no backpacks in store either, and we didn't want to lug grocery bags around with our guns to carry. It wouldn't be too long, we figured, and our problems would be resolved in one way or another at the PD. If someone was alive there, or there was some means of escape, we'd take it. If not, well, the nearest town was still 60 miles away, too far to bother walking, and there were monsters there. The PD would have to help us in some way. If it didn't, then we really were screwed, and we'd just have to wait it out in the store, praying desperately for a rescue of some sort, or we'd just kill ourselves before that happened. That walk was even worse than the one from before when we'd left our ruined car behind. As I said, I suspected the monster had left us alone that first day because of its injury. There was no reason it wouldn't come back now. Without the safety of our car, we'd have no chance against it, not with how fast it moved. I tried to not think about these things as we walked, but it was impossible not to. Even when we saw the building appear in the distance, my heart was still racing. I thought I'd felt stress during the finals week. That was a joke compared to this. Anything I'd experienced could not compare to the anxiety I felt out there. And if you've ever feared for your life, for any reason, you know what I mean. Unfortunately, nothing happened. We made it to the building in one piece without having seen a hint of a monster. I was inclined to believe that, just maybe, the monsters were all gone. Until my dad pointed out that there was still no one on the road. People would have returned to our town if it was safe. The PD was not large. It had a waiting area, a few jail cells, 3 officers, and a break room. And that was it. And so it did not take us long to search the place and determine that no one was around. We were not surprised. We heard the reports when all of this shit started that there had been missing police officers in the area, and that they were all dead by then. I was sure of it. The place had been left alone for a long time. Whoever had last left it had left it clean too. There was no food sitting around in the break room, no waste in the trash cans, no papers scattered on desks, and all the lights had been turned off too. It was like a museum. I would have almost preferred to see some signs of chaotic departure or bloodstains to suggest a fight had occurred, but there was nothing. The emptiness did nothing to calm my nerves. My dad remained stoic, probably to comfort me. He must have been scared like I was though, because anyone would have been, and still, he didn't shy away from anything we did, and he always made sure I was eating enough, even when we'd spent time in the store. He was frustrated by our search, to say the least. He knocked over a computer monitor in the waiting area, and it shattered it, throwing curses at the walls. And that wasn't the end of it, either. He went on to break the water dispenser and throw a chair at the wall, rip up magazines by the front door. I finally got him to calm down when I said that the monster might hear all the noise. A bullshit thing to say, I know, because wouldn't the monster have heard us before? And, while it had looked scary as hell, it hadn't seemed supernatural or anything. And besides its speed, that was. My dad went out the back entrance towards the parking lot. He figured it was worth checking, since we'd walked all that way to get here. It paid off. There was a police car in the lot, and it had its keys in the ignition. Problem was, the seat was covered in blood. I thought I was going to throw up looking at it, and somehow I kept my food down and went back. There had been rolls of paper towels in the break room, and so I grabbed one of them to bring back out. The seat took a while to clean off, and my dad insisted it was unnecessary, since he would be the one driving, and he didn't care. But I did. I didn't want his clothes to get soaked with blood, because anyone we saw across the border would get very suspicious. He relented at the thought. We did clean it though. We realised, of course, that there would be questions at the border regardless. We had the audacity to bring our passports, but a police car clearly had a town name written on it, and we were not police officers. My dad said we'd figure it out when we got there, that it wasn't worth worrying about when there were more pressing matters at hand. He did not know how true that statement would become. Before we could get in, there was a rustling noise behind us. I froze. My dad spun around immediately, both hands on his pistol. I saw him turn off his safety, but that was as far as he got. The monster was on him in a millisecond later. I could not see anything beneath the monster's panting flesh. Its head was bent over my dad like a starving dog. I probably waited too long to shoot it, but I did. I caught it in the shoulder, and it howled like it had earlier. I noted absent-mindedly that it was the same monster too. There was a crusted over wound on its side, exactly where I'd shot it from the car. When it backed off, my dad stumbled to his feet. He was covered in blood and slobber. I couldn't tell if he was alright, and I didn't have time. The monster came after me next. To say that it was terrifying does not do it justice. Having that thing bowl me over, then stand on top of me, slobbering like a beast, leaning its head close to mine, feeling its hot breath on my face. It was too much. I couldn't move, looking at this thing. I doubt I could have moved regardless, since it had my arms pinned beneath its weight. It was heavier than it looked, and it didn't look like a lightweight. I thought my bones were going to break beneath the thing, and it was squeezing air out of my lungs too, which didn't help. And for some reason, it did not go after me, like my dad. It spent half a second observing me with a sort of withdrawn intelligence. Its eyes, they shifted over my face, eager but furtive, looking at the gun still in my hand. I'm not sure if it made a connection between its wound and the gun, but I would have bet it did. I heard several gunshots and the monster flinched and then fell onto its side. Blood was pouring out of its head and I stared at it in shock from my place on the ground. It returned my gaze with a lifeless stare. My dad was okay, somehow. He had a few cuts and bruises, but nothing serious. I was worried about infection, and my dad said that was the least of our concerns. We just had to get the fuck out of there. As for me, I was just shaken up. I was also covered in monster slobber, which did make me throw up this time. Or maybe the sight of the monster made me do that, lying in a pool of its own blood. We went into the bathroom to wash up, and there was still running water somehow. And we went back to the car. My dad did not waste any time. Even though we were tired, he floored the gas and set off on the road. We made it to the border without any other encounters. I think we relaxed once we saw cars on the road again. I know I did. My dad, as unreadable as he had been before, at least let up on the gas pedal. The last thing we needed was a speeding ticket. The guys at the border didn't question us or even mention that we were in a police car. They just looked at our passports and let us go. Maybe they thought we were officers off duty, or they had seen other police come through before. Whatever the case, I was happy to avoid trouble. We're now living in the Toronto metro area. My dad had a lot of money saved up from his store, and I'm starting up college again, so I should be able to work soon. He also found a part-time job as a senior manager at a local chain. I guess they were impressed by his resume, though it did not make any mention of the monsters. In fact, the monsters haven't even made the news up here. I still don't know how our government kept it secret. I still can't post about it though, and my previous post got deleted when I mentioned our town's name. For some reason though, they did not delete my account. Maybe because my first post stayed up. As far as I know, the monsters haven't left our state. We've called other friends that live there, and they know nothing about it. My other friend, the one that texted me before we left, has not responded. I fear the worst for him. It'll be hard, adjusting to life in this new country. A new environment, for that matter. We lived in small towns our whole lives. The suburbs aren't that busy, but there are still more people than we're used to. And my college is way bigger than the one I used to attend. It's also been hard living without Mum. I don't really need to elaborate on that. Most of you reading this have probably lost someone close, and you know how hard it is. And for what it's worth, I think my dad and I have taken it well. Although we're still sad about what happened, my dad and I are happy now, I think. We'll actually have a chance to live again. After spending a month in hell, we deserve it. Wow. Awesome two-part story there by the wonderful Dogeman87. I do hope I pronounced that correctly. Thank you ever so much, brother, for allowing me to narrate this wonderful, chilling story. Guys and girls, you know the drill. As ever, please do let us know down below in the comments what you thought. Please do like and share. It really does help with the channel and our community further. And of course, don't forget to hashtag TeamFEAR. I hope you're all wonderfully well and happy. You had a great week, whether it's at school or work. And above all, remember, be safe, not sorry.